Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Ishvaro Guratmeti Murti Veda Vibhagine Vyomavadvyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Sarva Vedanta Siddhanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanandam Satgurum Pranatosmyaham Om.
Binding vasanas.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking about that the other day. Go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I was listening to one of your satsangs, and it was binding and unbinding vasanas from the point of view of the self, and how they get burned or dissolved. And I was just wondering if you can make a comment about that.
Oh, you mean from the point of view of the self, no vasana is binding?
No vasana is binding. Right, okay.
Is it?
And if we know that we're
but
not...
if you're taking a stand as awareness, then you're a jiva mimicking the self. In other words, you're faking it.
Okay.
And then a binding vasana is a vasana that you can't, that you feel compelled to act out.
Compelled to act out.
It's very interesting. I was thinking about the other day as I was down a walk, and like, how long do you have to resist a vasana before it becomes non-binding? In other words, a non-binding vasana might become binding again. Let's say I got a binding vasana for meat, and I decide I don't want to eat meat.
Uh-huh.
Now, how many days is it until let's say I go for 1 week without eating meat? Is that vasana binding or not? Can I say, okay, I've done without meat for 1 whole week, so that means the vasana is non-binding.
Depends what you did that week to work around the vasana.
That's an experiential vasana.
Because so then you claim, well, I've mastered my meat vasana, but then on the 7th day or the 8th day, then you eat meat. Now then you'd say, well, no, it's just optional. See, they say, oh no, that doesn't mean it's binding. It means it's optional. I could take it or leave it. Well, yeah, one time, but what about then? What if the next day you're taking meat?
So who is it that's taking?
And is the vasana binding at that time? Jiva.
The doer.
Yeah, the doer. Vasanas are only meaningful for the doer.
Yeah. So if I know that I'm not the doer, even if I eat meat.
That's right. If you know you're not the doer, that absolutely. But you got to make
part of my question.
You got to make sure that you know you're not the doer, because the jiva can claim it's not the doer, without knowing what it means not to be a doer.
That's significant.
That's significant.
That's very significant.
That's very significant, and this is what most enlightened people that you see, like advertising themselves to be enlightened, claim. They claim they're enlightened, but they don't know what that means. It's just a claim by the jiva. And you can claim that you're enlightened if you know that the I is not bound by, is not a doer.
But only the doer would claim that they were enlightened.
Yeah, depending on what it knows. No, it can claim it because the reflection is it's not identical, but it's one with the original source, isn't it? What's the difference between a ray and the sun? Got a ray of sunlight and then the sun. What's the difference? Well, there is a difference, but is there a difference?
It's the difference between the wave and the ocean.
Yeah.
I was going to say the sun is the total.
sun's the source, the original, but if the ray is non-different from the sun, is it? The sun is light, and the ray is light. So there's an identity between the ray, the individual, and the sun itself, the total.
So I'm not dependent on the doer to be who I really am.
That's right. That's right. The whole problem is what you think when you're thinking.
Yeah.
What?
So while
No, in other words, what you think you are when you're thinking. Do you think you're the one that's thinking, or do you think you're the one that's observing the one that's thinking? If you're the one that's observing the one that's thinking, then you're that's called moksha. Then you're free of the doer, the thinker.
One might say that if you have to make an effort to move your identity to the self, then there's more work to do.
That's right. That's right.
If it's something that becomes non-effort, and you're always there without thinking about it.
Without thinking, that's correct. Yeah. That's a very good. Dave said that. I think everybody heard. If you have to make an effort to shift your platform from the jiva to awareness, then there's still work to do. There's still the Satya Mityavasana is not firm. So you get diluted. You get temporarily diluted. A lot of spiritual people just shift back and forth. I used to call it the firefly stage. They're experiencing the self as the self for a period, and then what? The identification with the doer comes up, some vasana, some binding vasana appears, then the doer appears to work out that binding vasana, and then the self identifies with the doer, and then the self feels like, I've lost my enlightenment. I'm not the self anymore.
So how does one go from the firefly stage to...
Continual application of the teaching, continual contemplation, nididhyasana. Nididhyasana is not for gaining knowledge. Nididhyasana means spiritual practice. Once you know who you are. It's not for gaining knowledge because you already know yourself. It's for removing obstacles.
Once you've had a recognition of who you are,
then once you're doubt free, your knowledge about yourself is doubt free. You never think you're the jiva. You always think you're awareness, but you're denied the fruit of that knowledge. It's not just knowledge, you have to have the fruit of the knowledge. What's the fruit of the knowledge? Perfect satisfaction. It's called tripti. You can be absolutely convinced that you're awareness and know without a doubt that you're awareness, but still not feel perfectly satisfied. At every stage, at every moment. In other words, the rubber meets the road where your experience and your knowledge are one. Where you're actually experiencing yourself as totally satisfied, completely satisfied with yourself.
Thank you.
So self-knowledge is not the end, unless you're qualified when you get self-knowledge. If you're qualified when you get self-knowledge, then what? Then you're perfectly satisfied and you don't have to do any manana, any reflection, and you don't have to do any nididhyasana, any work, any spiritual work, any work to remove obstacles. Because nididhyasanas is just removing obstacles, which involves lifestyle changes. And a lot of people have the knowledge, but they don't want to change their lifestyle. Even though they realize who they are, but they're in circumstances that produce suffering for them. And rather than like changing their lifestyle and avoiding that suffering, they allow their jiva to suffer. So we don't call that moksha. If you're in an unpleasant circumstance and you don't suffer, then that's moksha. But there's a lot of people who know very well they're the self and they don't need any more knowledge, but yet they're living in bad situations. They're living in work situations or love situations or any kind of situations that produce pain for the jiva. And if you were the self, why would you want to allow your jiva to have pain? It doesn't make any sense to allow why would you want to do that? Since you're free to what? To change the circumstances that are producing the pain for the jiva. If you're not free to change the circumstances, you're not free. So just knowing who you are, that's, obviously essential step, but that's not the final step. The final step is living free. Living without attachment to any particular situation and allowing what? Ishvara to be the doer. Ishvara means the field of existence. See that you're just, as Barbara said, you're just a small little speck, fly speck, in the great field of existence, and the great field of existence is moving your little pixel-like person around where it wants it to go. In other words, there's no personal will there to have circumstances conform to your desire. Because if you're the self, you don't have a desire for particular circumstances. What is any circumstance is suitable for the self.
Didn't you just say if the jiva's in a painful circumstance, just get out of it?
Well, yeah, but that's right. But the jiva is part of the self, isn't it? And insofar as you have the jiva doesn't exist without you, you have a certain degree of power over that jiva, don't you? See, the doer wants to always have its cake and eat it too. So, and only you know whether you're doing it, whether you're cheating or not. Nobody else can tell. We get this all the time, people who know who they are, and then they write and say, well, karma yoga is not working anymore in a certain circumstance. That's because they shouldn't be in that circumstance. They use karma yoga to make that circumstance okay for a while, but then the basic dharma of their presence in that particular circumstance, you know what I'm talking about, was no longer viable. And yet they're still attached to that circumstances. Because they haven't got the balls to walk away. Even though they're suffering. They prefer to be attached to some kind of low-level misery, or maybe even medium-level misery, than to actually get off their butts and move their poor jiva to some place where that jiva would be happier. I mean, you have to have compassion for yourself. That the self is compassionate. It's a merciful self. It sees everything as itself, and it doesn't like suffering. So, but your point's absolutely right. when there's no need to move your position, when the knowledge is just absolutely solid, then you are the self. You're not a jiva. You always were, but the jiva is 100% on board with that, so there's no problem. Actually, there isn't even a jiva. No?
You could say the jiva's a parent.
Yeah, it looks like a real thing, but it's not actually real. It seems real. It experiences, but just because you're experiencing something doesn't mean that what you're experiencing is real, or that the one that's experiencing is real. But that's the definition of reality for samsaris, isn't it? What I'm experiencing is what's real. But Vedanta says, no, that's not true. Unless you know that what you're experiencing is just yourself. If you know that, then everything that you're experiencing is real, isn't it? Huh? It's just understanding this relationship between consciousness and what? And the person. Between you and this person that appears in front of you. You're the background and this person is the foreground. This is the action and inaction, inaction, inaction. You're inactive. You can't move because you're non-dual.